Thank you all for coming again on a Friday night. And the reason I'm giving up my time here on a Friday night is because this test has been under the radar for far too long, and now it's really ready for prime time. And because I have seen the effects of using this test in my practice, and it has really been unbelievable to the point where I'm now using it on 80% of my patients, and it's not because I'm recommending it for 80% of my patients. I'm recommending it at this point to 100% of my patients, and 80% of them are taking me up on that invitation to have this test done. And it's been so successful now, I am getting an incredible amount of referrals about just saying I'm here for my food sensitivity testing because I just don't know what to eat. And my friend or my relative had this test done and has just been blown away by the results. So it is actually generating an incredible amount of new business and new referrals for me. And so that's why I'm here. Because we all know from studying functional medicine that there is something about this entity called food sensitivity that is somehow clinically relevant, but the testing, at least for me in my experience, has been challenging to interpret. There are so many different tests out there. How do you know what to use? And most of the time they come back with so many foods that people are overwhelmed. And then instead of engaging them in a conversation or a therapeutic encounter and giving them information that can be helpful, they're in this state of overwhelm, they're in this state of shock and awe, and you really can't get past that. So this, because of its accuracy, we're going to go through that, this test actually tells patients what they really need to avoid. The other thing about this, and I'm mentioning this up front, is for those of you that do diagnostic testing for increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut, this test in and of itself is a diagnostic test for leaky gut and increased intestinal permeability, so you no longer have to have a separate test for that. So food sensitivities are incredibly common, they're incredibly prevalent. These are the statistics, 100 million people worldwide. It's increasing, we all know this. The issues of gut health are just increasing, and food sensitivities are one of the main causes of that. And we all know that the manifestation of food sensitivity goes across a wide clinical spectrum. Simply skin stuff to real chronic illness. It's mostly confined to these 8 food groups. And one food or all of the foods in that group can be problematic. And there's also an entity about delayed food sensitivity, depending on which IgG molecule is triggered. And this is one of the few tests that tests IgG1 through IgG4, and we'll go through why that's so important clinically later on. The other thing this test does that other tests don't do is test for activated complement. So we as functional medicine practitioners are all over this concept of inflammation. But the link between an IgG sensitivity and inflammation, we may not be clear about that, and the link is not as direct as activated complement. C3 complement is the direct mediator for the inflammatory response, the pro-inflammatory cytokines, the pro-inflammatory leukotrienes. And so finding foods that activate complement, that's always been the holy grail for food sensitivity testing, and that's what this test does. And the importance of that is that activated complement can cause destruction locally and systemically. When we talk about IgG responses, it's usually from an immune complex, and it's usually distant from the site of the intestine. So that immunoglobulin complex travels, and you get issues in places other than the gut, distant sites. This complement can be distant and can also actually cause problems in the gut itself. So when do I use it? My patient doesn't feel well. Now you'll see why I get to 100% of my patients, right? I don't feel well. I've got a thyroid problem, primarily Hashimoto's, any kind of joint issues, any arthritis, brain fog, autoimmune disease, any kind of fatigue, any digestive or gut issues, infertility or first trimester loss. So I'm going to show you some very interesting literature, because I'm in women's health, about infertility, first trimester loss, fibroids, endometriosis, or breast cancer, and then any other cancer. So this is how I get to 100%. And if there's something here that you see that's not on the list, we can talk about it later, and I guarantee you I can give you a biological reason why you should do food testing for that symptom complex. So why do I use it? We went through when I use it, but why do I use it? Because the immune complex issues and the inflammation that's associated with foods are an underlying condition for, or an underlying problem for every condition I see. And if someone comes in for optimal wellness, they also buy themselves one of these tests, because we want to prevent any sort of problems from developing in the future. So why do we focus on the gut and food reactions? This is basic functional medicine, right? Where do we produce 3/4 of our neurotransmitters, 2/3 of our immune tissue, 10 times more cells than the rest of the body combined, genome 100 times larger than our own genome, and metabolic activity greater than the liver. Now, for me, what I've learned over, let's say, the last 5 to 7 years in my practice of functional medicine is what we call the gut-brain connection. And it's amazing how patients get better with depression or other kind of dysphorias or mood issues once you heal the gut. And this is a primary way of doing that. So what's the answer to that? Clearly the gut. And what's the first gut issue to understand? The first gut issue to understand is increased intestinal permeability. So you all know this. This is teaching or speaking to the choir about why it's important. Because the gut mucosa is exposed to the external environment. It appears to be inside, but it's really exposed to everything externally. Bacteria, dietary antigens, right? So foods, viruses, but it's far greater quantities, and this happens daily, far greater quantities than the systemic immune system. That, to me, is a piece of information that's very powerful. So if we're having something that is problematic for the gut immune system, that's a big deal. And this is then what the immune system sees in a lifetime. More on a daily basis than what the immune system sees in a lifetime. That's very powerful. So I just want to go through this diagram a little bit closely, because this explains why gut issues are so important. So we start here on the top left with people eat and foods enter the gut. And then what happens if our digestive system is working properly is we have enzymes, and those enzymes take those long polypeptides and cleave them into smaller fragments. We also have enzymes, and then those molecules get transported and absorbed in a selective basis, so that theoretically only what we want to get absorbed into our bloodstream actually comes into our bloodstream. Sometimes, however, as you know, we have a release of some of the proteins that keep these intestinal cells together. And that leads to bigger molecules getting in than they should get in. Now, what you need to know is that sometimes the breakdown products of foods actually create inflammation, and that inflammation then creates more breakdown. It becomes a feed-forward cycle. So we see a breakdown here, so things get in, and the molecules that usually keep these tight junctions tight, they end up going into the bloodstream. The immune system makes antibodies to them, and then you attack the actual compounds that are supposed to